Welcome to Justice Glow. I'm Maya, a 30-year-old seamstress and a single mom to my 8-year-old son, Leo. My entire life, my toxic family treated me like an absolute disgrace just because I raised a child alone. My sister, Isabella, was a spoiled socialite. I stayed awake for weeks sewing her $20,000 crystal wedding dress for free, only for her to publicly claim a luxury brand designed it. But the ultimate betrayal happened at her VIP wedding reception. She grabbed the microphone and humiliated me in front of hundreds of guests, calling me used goods and asking if anyone wanted to adopt me. She thought I would break. She didn't expect her billionaire groom to snatch the microphone, expose her stolen dress, and cancel the entire wedding. If you've ever been shamed by your own family, you need to hear how I took my power back. I was sitting at my worn-out sewing machine in our tiny apartment, the late afternoon sunlight coming softly through the window blinds and making long, thin lines across my messy work table. Scraps of lace, spools of thread, and measuring tapes were scattered everywhere, but even though my workspace looked chaotic, it felt like a safe place to me. I kept pressing my foot on the pedal, trying my best to finish a client's custom dress. I was in a hurry because I only had 20 minutes left before I had to start cooking dinner for my 8-year-old son, Leo. Just then, Leo ran into the room, leaning on the door frame with a bright smile. "Mom, are you done yet?" he asked. "Almost, buddy," I said, looking up at him and wiping the sweat from my forehead. "What have you been up to?" He walked over and held out his hand, revealing a perfectly folded paper origami butterfly. He was always making these little paper creations to make me smile. Those little things made all the hard days worth it. Ever since my dad passed away 5 years ago, it had just been me and Leo taking care of each other. Being a single mother at 30 was not easy, but we stayed strong together. Suddenly, my phone started to buzz on the table. I looked at the screen and knew right away it was my mom calling. I answered, and her voice came through quickly and sharply. "Don't forget about dinner tomorrow at my house. Isabella is bringing her fiancé. You're coming, right?" It didn't sound like she was asking. It sounded like a strict command. "Yeah, I'll bring Leo," I said, already feeling a tight knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. She sighed loudly into the receiver. "Fine. Just make sure he behaves. This is Isabella's special time." I stayed quiet for a moment, entirely used to the fact that everything in our family always revolved around my older sister. Isabella was a glamorous socialite who had the perfect life, the perfect designer clothes, and everyone's constant admiration. To my mother, my sister was a flawless masterpiece, while I was just the daughter who ruined her life and became a disgrace by having a child out of wedlock. "What does her fiancé do?" I asked, trying to sound normal. "His name is Julian," my mom said proudly. "He's a billionaire tech CEO. He comes from an incredibly wealthy family, and he is absolutely perfect for her." The next evening, Leo and I stood outside my mom's massive museum-like house in the upscale part of town. I fixed Leo's collar and gently squeezed his shoulder. "Ready, kiddo?" I asked. He nodded, but I could see he was a little nervous. When my mom opened the door, her smile didn't look very warm. The house smelled like expensive candles and rich food. We walked into the living room and I saw Isabella sitting elegantly on a velvet couch, wearing a dress that likely cost more than my rent. When she saw us, she stood up with a fake, tight smile, barely even glancing at Leo. The tall, sharp-looking man standing next to her got up. "This is Julian," Isabella said, holding his arm possessively. Julian smiled kindly and held out his hand to me. "Nice to meet you," he said warmly. Then, to my absolute surprise, he turned his attention entirely to Leo. He noticed the small paper origami butterfly Leo was clutching nervously in his hands. "Hey, did you make that yourself?" Julian asked, his eyes softening. "Yes," Leo said softly. "I make them for my mom." Julian smiled wider, completely ignoring the wealthy adults in the room to talk to my son. I felt shocked. No one in my family ever talked to Leo like he was important. Isabella quickly cleared her throat, clearly annoyed that the spotlight had shifted. She looked me up and down, staring at my simple, handmade clothes with absolute disgust. "You're not going to wear that to the wedding, are you?" she asked sharply. I stayed calm and said, "I'll figure it out." My mom immediately chimed in, crossing her arms. "We didn't ask you to be a bridesmaid. You're too busy with your situation," she said, waving a dismissive hand toward Leo. I pressed my hands tightly together, but didn't say anything back. Julian looked visibly uncomfortable with their toxic remarks, but for now, he stayed quiet. Dinner felt painfully long and strange, but under the table, Leo gently touched my hand. That small touch gave me the strength to survive the night, reminding me that no matter how much my family looked down on me, I still had my boy. As the wedding date approached, Isabella's extravagant demands quickly drained my mother's massive budget. Between the imported orchids, the ice sculptures, and the five-course caviar menu, they had completely run out of money for the one thing Isabella cared about most: her wedding dress. One rainy evening, my mother showed up unannounced at my cramped apartment. She didn't bother to say hello to Leo. She just dropped a heavy folder of bridal magazine clippings onto my sewing table. "Isabella needs a custom gown," my mother demanded, crossing her arms. "French silk, cathedral train, and hand-stitched crystal bodice. The boutiques are charging $20,000, which we no longer have. You're a seamstress. It's time you actually make yourself useful to this family and sew it for her as your wedding gift." I wanted to say no. I was already working 14-hour days just to keep the lights on and buy groceries for Leo. But my mother gave me an ultimatum. If I didn't do this, she would financially cut me off from the small college fund my late father had set up for Leo. Swallowing my pride for the sake of my son's future, I agreed. For the next 3 weeks, I barely slept. After putting Leo to bed, I sat hunched over my sewing machine until dawn. My fingers were pricked, bleeding, and calloused from hand-stitching thousands of tiny Swarovski crystals into the delicate lace. I poured my absolute soul into that dress. When it was finally finished, hanging in my living room, it was a breathtaking $20,000 masterpiece. It was the greatest thing I had ever created. But my pride was instantly shattered just 2 days later. During my lunch break, I opened Instagram and saw a new post from Isabella. It was a professional bridal photo shoot of her wearing the dress I had bled over. But the caption made my stomach completely drop. "Feeling like absolute royalty. A massive thank you to the exclusive luxury brand House of Laurent for custom designing this breathtaking masterpiece just for me. Number Billionaire Wedding, number House of Laurent, number Designer Bride." There was not a single mention of my name. She had blatantly stolen my labor, my sleepless nights, and my intellectual property, handing the credit to a famous luxury brand just to boost her socialite image. Furious, I immediately called her. "Isabella, what is that post?" I demanded, my hands shaking. "I made that dress. I stayed awake for 3 weeks stitching those crystals." Isabella let out a cold, dismissive laugh. "Oh, calm down, Maya. I'm marrying a billionaire tech CEO. His family is pure old money. Do you honestly expect me to tell the elite high society that my wedding gown was stitched together in a cramped, smelly apartment by my pathetic, unwed single mother sister? It's embarrassing. Claiming it's from House of Laurent saves face for everyone. You should be grateful I'm even wearing it. Just keep your mouth shut." Before I could say another word, she hung up.
Hi, everyone. Justice Glow here. Let's pause for a second. Notice the classic narcissistic manipulation happening here? Toxic family members love to use family duty to extort your free labor. But the moment your work yields prestige, they erase you because your existence doesn't fit their perfect narrative. If you've ever had your hard work stolen by a relative, drop a 1 in the comments. Let's see what happens next.
I was suffocating from the injustice, but with the wedding only days away, I had no choice but to stay quiet for Leo's sake. The night before the wedding, my mother hosted a lavish cocktail reception at her house. I wasn't invited as a guest. I was ordered to stay in the background, helping the catering staff organize trays of champagne. Leo was sitting quietly in a hidden corner of the grand hallway, trying to stay out of everyone's way. To pass the time, he had taken a thick white cocktail napkin and was carefully folding it into an intricate paper origami butterfly. Suddenly, Julian, the billionaire groom, walked down the hallway, stepping away from the loud crowd to take a phone call. As he passed by, he glanced down and saw Leo holding the paper butterfly. Julian froze. He slowly lowered his phone, entirely forgetting his call. A look of profound shock, mixed with deep, overwhelming emotion, washed over his face. He stared at the origami butterfly as if he were looking at a ghost. He took a slow step toward my son, crouching down to his eye level. "Hey, little guy," Julian said, his voice unusually soft and trembling slightly. Where? Where did you learn to fold a butterfly exactly like that?" Leo looked up, blinking innocently. "My mom taught me," he said. "We used to make them for a sick lady a long time ago. They made her smile." Julian's breath hitched. His eyes darted up, frantically looking around the hallway until his gaze locked onto me, standing by the kitchen doors. For a split second, there was a flash of intense recognition in his eyes. But before Julian could speak to me, the sharp clicking of heels echoed down the hall. Isabella swooped in, her face tight with panic and anger. She grabbed Julian's arm tightly, forcing a loud, fake laugh. "Julian, darling, the photographer is looking for us," she chirped, physically pulling him away from Leo. As she dragged him down the hall, she shot me a venomous, threatening glare that clearly said, "Stay away from him." Julian kept looking back at us over his shoulder, his brow furrowed in deep thought. I didn't know it yet, but that small paper butterfly had just unlocked a memory that was about to destroy Isabella's entire fake empire. The day of the wedding finally arrived, and the venue was nothing short of a royal coronation. It was held at the most exclusive five-star hotel in the city, in a grand ballroom that looked absolutely breathtaking. Bright, massive crystal chandeliers hung from the high vaulted ceilings, shining like stars and casting a golden, luxurious glow over the entire room. The tables were draped in heavy, immaculate white silk cloths, and towering floral arrangements of imported white roses were placed everywhere. When Isabella made her grand entrance, the entire room gasped. She looked radiant, walking down the aisle in the breathtaking $20,000 crystal bodice gown. The hand-stitched Swarovski crystals caught the light beautifully, making her sparkle under the chandeliers. Everyone whispered about how incredible the House of Laurent design was. As I stood in the back, watching her parade my stolen labor, my heavily bandaged and calloused fingers ached. I swallowed the bitter lump in my throat, reminding myself that I was only here to keep the peace for Leo's sake. However, the disrespect did not end with the stolen dress. When it was time for the reception, I scanned the golden seating chart at the entrance. The VIP tables near the main stage were filled with wealthy socialites, my mother's friends, and Julian's elite billionaire family. But my name, along with Leo's, was nowhere near them. We were escorted to a tiny, wobbly table, pushed far into the darkest corner of the ballroom, right next to the swinging kitchen doors. Every few minutes, frantic waiters would rush past us, carrying heavy trays of food and dirty plates, constantly bumping into my chair. We were completely hidden from the celebration, treated like an embarrassing secret that my family wanted to sweep under the rug. I held Leo's small hand under the table, forcing a smile so he wouldn't realize how deeply we were being shunned. People were talking, laughing, and enjoying the lavish celebration, completely oblivious to our isolation. Eventually, the music softened, and the clinking of champagne glasses signaled the time for speeches. Isabella stood up at the head table and confidently took the microphone, her stolen dress sparkling brilliantly under the stage spotlights. She smiled brightly at the crowd, playing the role of the perfect, sweet bride. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight to celebrate our love," she began in a sugary, rehearsed voice. The crowd clapped politely. For a brief moment, everything seemed normal, and I thought we would simply survive this night in our quiet, hidden corner. But then, her eyes scanned the room, purposely locking onto my table in the shadows. Her sweet smile morphed into a cold, predatory smirk. The tone of her voice completely changed, becoming sharp, mocking, and unbelievably mean. I also want to give a special shout out to my older sister, Maya, who is sitting way in the back, Isabella said into the microphone. It is so incredibly brave of her to show up tonight, especially as a pathetic single mom raising a kid completely alone. The entire ballroom suddenly became dead quiet. A few wealthy guests exchanged shocked glances, while others let out small, awkward laughs that echoed terribly in the silence. But Isabella wasn't finished. She leaned closer to the microphone, her eyes practically gleaming with cruelty. Since there are so many successful, wealthy men here tonight, I have to ask, is anyone here looking to adopt? She sneered, pointing directly at me. She's still single and desperately needs someone to take care of her. This time, more people laughed. The sound of hundreds of wealthy guests chuckling at my expense felt like a physical blade cutting right through my chest. Suddenly, my aunt, who had always been my mother's cruelest enabler, stood up from her VIP seat with a glass of wine in her hand. She smiled in a vicious, highly entertained way, clearly enjoying this horrible moment. Oh, don't be so harsh, Isabella. My aunt called out loudly for the whole room to hear. Our Maya has always been a little dull and plain, but hey, even secondhand used goods can still have some value, even with a kid attached. The ballroom erupted into even louder, roaring laughter. My entire world blurred. My eyes instantly filled with burning tears, but I refused to let them fall. I looked down and saw my sweet, innocent 8-year-old boy trembling. Leo had grabbed my hand so tightly his knuckles were white. Tears were streaming down his flushed cheeks as he looked around at the hundreds of adults laughing at his mother. I realized my own hands were violently shaking. My chest felt completely crushed, so tight that I couldn't even draw a breath of air. They hadn't just stolen my labor and my money. They had chosen the most important night of their lives to publicly strip away my last ounce of dignity. I didn't care about the dress anymore. I didn't care about keeping the peace. I had to protect my son from these monsters. My heart was beating so fast and hard it felt like it was going to shatter my ribs. I slowly stood up, gripping Leo's hand tightly, fully prepared to turn my back on my toxic family forever and run out of those kitchen doors. But just as I turned to leave, a loud, violent sound echoed from the front of the room. It was the harsh, heavy sound of a chair violently scraping across the floor at the head table. Suddenly, a heavy chair scraped violently across the floor at the head table. I stopped in my tracks and turned around. Julian stood up, his face flushed red with anger and his hands clenched tightly into fists. He stormed over to Isabella, completely ignoring her panicked expression, and snatched the microphone right out of her hands. Isabella let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. Julian, darling, what are you doing? She stammered, trying to grab his arm. Julian raised his hand to stop her. Tonight was supposed to be my wedding. His voice echoed through the speakers, serious, powerful, and completely unwavering. But the most important thing right now is the truth. He turned his gaze away from his wealthy family and looked directly at me in the shadows. His eyes were full of a deep, overwhelming emotion. You call her a pathetic single mom? You call her used goods? Julian's voice boomed, shaking the silent room. Maya and I didn't just meet recently. We met 5 years ago when my little sister, Amoris, was dying of severe leukemia. Loud gasps of surprise rippled through the ballroom. I froze exactly where I stood. My breath caught in my throat. Maya was a volunteer at the hospital. Julian continued, his voice echoing in the massive space. She brought books, sang songs, and gave hope to my sister when she had none. She became her closest friend. His voice softened as he looked down at my son. She also brought her little boy, Leo. He used to sit by her hospital bed and fold intricate paper, origami butterflies, to make Amora smile until her very last day. Leo looked up at him, his tear-filled eyes widening in surprise, and he squeezed my hand tighter. Julian reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out the white paper butterfly Leo had folded the night before. He held it up for the entire room to see. I never forgot them, he said. Then, Julian turned his furious gaze back to Isabella and my aunt. His voice hardened into cold steel. But what I heard and witnessed tonight was pure cruelty. And since we are sharing truths, let me share one more about this perfect bride. Isabella's face drained of all color. She looked terrified. Julian, please, don't, she begged. Julian pointed directly at Isabella's sparkling custom gown, that $20,000 dress she is wearing. It wasn't designed by House of Laurent. It was made with the blood, sweat, and sleepless nights of the very sister she just humiliated and shoved by the kitchen doors. The ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. Shocked whispers broke out among the elite guests. Someone dropped a champagne glass, and it shattered loudly on the marble floor. You stole her labor to feed your vanity, and then you tried to destroy her dignity, Julian said, his voice laced with absolute disgust. My aunt stood up from her VIP table, her face pale and panicked. Julian, you don't know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing, Julian replied sharply. He pulled the wedding ring off his finger and slammed it onto the table. I'm calling off this wedding. Send me the bill. Isabella burst into frantic, ugly tears, reaching for him, but Julian stepped away, completely done. He walked straight past the head table, past the silent, staring billionaires, and came right to our dark corner. He knelt down in front of Leo. Thank you for being such a bright light, Julian said kindly to my son. Then he stood up and held his hand out to me. His eyes were warm, offering a rescue I never thought I would get. Come with me, he whispered. I looked at his hand for a moment, letting the reality wash over me, and then I took it. With Leo beside me, the three of us walked out of the grand hall together. We walked past the shocked guests, past my mother's horrified face, and past Isabella, who was sobbing uncontrollably on the stage in her stolen dress. We didn't look back. We pushed through the heavy hotel doors and stepped out into the cool night air. For the first time that day, I felt like I could finally breathe again. Together, we walked out of the grand hall, leaving the chaos behind, and we didn't look back. We went to a quiet place away from the city where the air felt peaceful and I felt like I could finally breathe again. Julian's phone kept ringing with frantic calls from Isabella, but he calmly turned it off, firmly stating that he was completely done and she could talk to his lawyer. He apologized for what my family put me through, explaining that after Amoris died, he felt very lost, and Isabella's loud energy had simply helped him forget his sadness at first. But after seeing her cruelty, he realized she never cared about the things that truly mattered. The fallout for my family was swift and absolute. After the scandalous truth about the stolen $20,000 dress was exposed, the elite high society completely turned their backs on Isabella. She lost many of her wealthy friends, her socialite career stopped growing, and she was left drowning in the massive debt of a canceled billionaire wedding. My mother and aunt occasionally left voicemails that sounded like apologies, but still somehow blamed me, so I never called them back. I didn't want that kind of hurt in my life anymore. A few days later, Julian took Leo and me to visit Amoris's grave. It was a beautiful, peaceful place surrounded by tall trees. Leo knelt down and gently placed a fresh paper origami butterfly right next to her flowers. Julian's eyes filled with tears as he thanked my son, whispering that his sister would absolutely love it. Standing there in the quiet breeze, holding hands, I felt a profound sense of hope in my heart for the first time in a very long time. A year later, my life had completely transformed. With Julian's unwavering support and belief in my talent, I stood proudly outside my very own design studio, Maya's Bridal. My business was thriving, and women from all over the city were lining up for my custom gowns. Julian had become a permanent, beautiful part of our lives, never missing Leo's school events or our quiet evenings at home. It was Christmas Eve, and our home was filled with warm, glowing lights. Leo was fast asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, while Julian and I sat near the fireplace. Suddenly, Julian reached into his pocket and took out a small box. Inside was a beautiful, vintage ring. This was Amoris's, he he said gently, looking deeply into my eyes. She told me to give it to someone who teaches me what love really means. Tears filled my eyes as he asked me to marry him and build our life together. I looked at my sleeping son, then at Julian, and smiled softly. We are already a family, I whispered. But yes, let's make it official. Outside, the snow began to fall slowly, marking a brand new, beautiful beginning for all of us.
Hi everyone, Justice Glow here. Before we wrap up, I want to make something clear. Today's story is a dramatized narration based on real experiences shared by our audience, and community character details, names, and certain events have been altered to protect identities. Maya's story perfectly highlights a harsh reality. The single mom stigma is frequently weaponized by toxic families to turn an independent woman into a scapegoat. Isabella and her mother tried to diminish Maya's worth to exploit her labor, using her marital status as an excuse to treat her like used goods. But Maya's ultimate victory proves that your worth is never defined by a ring on your finger or the cruel labels your family forces upon you. Julian's intervention wasn't just a rescue. It was karma returning the pure kindness Maya and Leo showed his dying sister years ago. What about you? Have you ever had a toxic relative try to shame you or steal your hard work? How did you set your boundaries? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more stories about reclaiming your power here on Justice Glow. Stay strong, and see you in the next video.